What's up everybody, Matt Moran here for another car review. This is of course the 2017 BMW M2. Huge thanks to Greg for providing me with this very sweet M2 to review for you guys today. So about the M2, well, I just love these things. I mean, they really remind me of the E46 M3 and that whole generation with the smaller, stubbier appearance that you have here, you know, the shorter wheelbase over the 4 Series, of course. And I just love, though, you know, the standard 2 Series look great, but especially an M2 trim, it looks so mean with these bulging fenders. It just looks so intimidating there. There's like claws in the front bumper almost, the very aggressive jaw look to it. And then, you know, coming down to the sides, you have these, again, these bulging fenders with these meaty tires, big, nice looking wheels that have these large M4 brakes as well. They just, the whole package, I mean, it looks strictly performance oriented, you know, no messing around. I love, you know, these little fender badge you have here that looks cool. Coming down to the back, it just looks awesome. Again, you got a nice carbon fiber spoiler there on this one. And overall, just, you know, you got the quad exhaust tips and everything else. And it's just a really nice package here with the M2. I mean, yes, it's a little smaller and stubbier, but I think it's still one of the best looking M vehicles that BMW has ever produced. Right, so for the interior of the M2, well, it's a really cool place to be. It's very simple too. Whenever you build these, there's really not any options for the interior. You can only get one leather color, you can only get one trim. It's just the way it comes is basically the way it is, which it makes it very simple, which is an unusual thing for BMW configurations in the past. But anyway, the first thing you notice about the 2 Series is definitely a lot smaller than the M4 in the interior as well. You feel it. I mean, everything, it's a little closer to you. You know, the car feels less wide, and so that's the first thing you notice. It's a little more snug in here versus an M4, but obviously it's the 2 Series. It's smaller. That's kind of what you expect, but it's not claustrophobic or anything like that. It's still, you know, plenty of room here, and doesn't feel cramped really in any way. But anyway, first things first, sitting down in these seats, really nice seats here you get in the M2, a lot more aggressive than a standard 2 Series. Really nice bolstering too. They're not as adjustable as higher end, you know, M vehicles, but still, I mean, you have adjustable lumbar here, and they just feel really nice and supportive, and I mean, they just grip you in all the right ways. You do have also the thigh support adjustment, which is nice, you know, especially for longer drives and whatnot. And so overall, really great seats. Next to the steering wheel in the M2, which is great. It's very similar wheel, or exactly the same as what you see in an M3 or an M4. Obviously, this is a manual, so no paddles, but man, just a really great 9 and 3 grip, nice 10 and 2 notches, a very thick wheel in signature BMW M fashion. We have a few metal buttons, a few plastic ones, but very clean and simple. There aren't a million buttons on here. There's just really 6, and that's it. And so really just a really nice, simple, and great looking wheel. Next are the gauges in the M2, and they're also really nice and simple, but great looking gauges. Analog for the most part here. I like the gray backgrounds you get here with the M. And you do have the partially digital, partially analog fuel gauge, and then you have the digital efficient dynamics thing on the right hand side there. That's basically useless. And that's really about it. You can scroll through, you know, your little trip computer, and then there is a coolant gauge that's just, it just says okay, and has a basic readout there that I don't think ever really even moves. And so that's about it. You know, there aren't any additional gauges, you know, like an oil temp gauge or anything like that, which I know some other people have been critical of. And it would be nice, you know, if you do plan to track this and things like that. But, you know, for daily driving, I think the gauges are totally fine, and they look great. I like how they're a little bit smaller too. You know, the whole cluster is a little bit smaller, of course, being the 2 Series. It just looks really great. Coming over to the center of the dashboard here, it's really nice. Again, your typical BMW arrangement. If you've been in any other BMW in the past 15 years, you should feel right at home in this. So, you know, right up top here, you have the nice widescreen iDrive display, which is, you know, much higher resolution here in the past couple of years. Looks really great. I mean, the maps and everything are all very nice, crisp, and everything's very snappy and quick here, you know, using the iDrive controller to navigate through everything, and it works really well. You know, I think there's still, it's a little bit more complicated than just as normal touchscreen. You do have the button shortcuts here down by the iDrive controller to help get you to things quicker, but still, just even changing the radio station, you know, unless you have presets saved here, it still takes a little bit more scrolling than you would like, I think, but overall it works fine enough, and you know, iDrive is pretty easy to get used to. And I do like, you know, the additional stuff, like you have a little power and torque gauge there that you can put up on the screen. The split screen effect is also very cool, so you can see multiple things at the same time, and so overall, really nice display there. Coming down though, you have your basic volume knob, which feels good. No tune knob, but you do have a little rocker, and then you have your basic climate controls, again, like any other BMW you've ever seen, really. And so overall, very simple, again, uncluttered, easy to use, and so very nicely done there. As far as storage space in the M2, it's pretty good for a small little coupe. In the doors here, you have a massive pocket that has like 2 bottle holders and an additional large pocket here as well. So I mean, tons of space in the door alone. Then coming over to the center here, you have this tiny little thing that flips up. You can, hold some change in there, and that's about it. Pretty unusable, but for the key and things like that, it works. And then you have a power outlet here, and then you have 2 cup holders. And then coming back here, you do have a little rocker for sport and comfort modes. There aren't different modes in this car like there are in the M4, where you can set up each individual aspect of the car differently. It's just one catch-all mode, and that's it. But again, that should get the job done fine. We'll have to see once we get out on the road. Coming back here, you have the center armrest, which is really nice and softly padded. Feels great. You open that up, and you have a very shallow little cubby here that has a USB jack, an auxiliary jack, and that's about it. Now, they still have these old-fashioned BMW snap-in adapters to put your phone in there or whatever, and I wish they would just eliminate that thing. It would give you a lot more depth, I think, in this little cubby, but regardless, it's still a good amount of space there. Again, for a coupe, it's about what you'd see in something like a Camaro or something like that, and so not too small. I think it's good enough for the basics. Backseat space, though, in the M2 is surprisingly roomy. I was really shocked. I'm 5'9". Me sitting behind myself, I still have probably about 2 or almost 3 inches of legroom there to spare, and I have maybe about an inch or 2 of headroom. So maybe if you're a little bit on the taller side, you'd be pressed for headroom back there, but you should be fine on the legs. And I mean, it's really a much larger and roomier backseat than I was expecting here out of the M2. And so overall, I think it's a pretty usable backseat. I don't think you'd still want to use it every day, but it's certainly for smaller people or children, it's a really great backseat and very usable. Trunk space in the M2 is pretty good as well. Now again, this is a little bit of a stubbier, smaller car, so that back end doesn't have as much room for a trunk there, but it's still a decent size, smaller than the muscle cars and things like that, but for other sports cars of this type, I think it's, about on par with the rest of those, and it's still plenty, to fit 2 suitcases in there with ease, and that's probably about it, maybe a little bit more, but overall, I mean, you're usually going to be driving just 2 people in here, and so I think it's more than enough space for what this car is. Alright, so start up and go for a drive. The M2 just has your basic BMW key. It's got a nice little weight to it, some metal buttons. Anyway, you just leave it in your pocket because it's keyless entry, push button start. So you just put your foot on the clutch, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. Alright, so setting off in the 2017 BMW M2. We're in comfort mode right now. First things you notice here, clutch is nice and light. Has a good feeling to it though, it's not too light. Shifter is so precise too. There isn't any kind of vagueness, or it's not so close that it's a guessing game. You know exactly what gear you're going for. They're nicely spaced out, but not so much that it feels sloppy or anything. Really a perfect gear shifter. And here in comfort mode so far, it's just a really nice smooth ride. I mean, we're on some pretty nice roads here, but it's still just feels really good so far. Another thing you notice right off the bat though in the M2 is the brakes feel really grabby, so you have to be pretty delicate with your inputs, at least so far here at low speeds. But it feels pretty good though. They're definitely those large brakes from the M4, so they feel really beefy. But we'll put it in a Sport Plus mode here, and let's turn it on the straight road here first, see how it does. Here we go. It's impressive. Man, this thing gets up to speed pretty well. So the M2 has a 3-liter inline-6 single turbo motor, and so it does 365 horsepower, 343 pound-feet of torque normally, but there's an overboost function that actually allows you to go up to 369 pound-feet of torque if the computers deem it appropriate. So thanks to that overboost and everything, this thing is really quick. 0 to 60 times for these range somewhere in the low 4 seconds. I've seen anywhere from 4.1 to 4.4, and BMWs are often underrated, so it could even be a little quicker than that. And that's with the manual here too. If you were to get the dual clutch, then it would probably be even better. But yeah, I mean, it feels pretty punchy. I think mid-range here, the turbo takes a second to spool up, and then once it does spool, then it pulls. It feels very similar to the M4s and the M3s that I reviewed in the past, where it's the same kind of deal, where it's kind of an old school turbo feeling. You put your foot into it, and then you feel it. I mean, you actually have to count probably 2 or 3 seconds before you really get and feel that turbo sensation and feel it come on strong. At least at 25 to 3,000 RPMs. I'm sure in some of the higher RPMs it's a little quicker to react. But yeah, this gearbox and this clutch are just a joy to use. They're so easy to use, but they just feel really just gratifying to row through the gears too. Whenever I was getting on it there on that straightaway, I mean, just rowing through them real quick, it just feels awesome. I really love this gearbox. There hasn't been a gearbox that struck me as being this enjoyable to use in a while. I really love the way that it feels. I mean, BMWs have always usually had really good gearboxes, but this one feels a little more natural and predictable than some of the other BMW manuals that I've used in the past. Another thing about this gearbox that you'll either love or hate is that there is an auto rev match feature that you can't disable, I think, unless you actually disable the stability control. Once you completely get rid of that, then it gets rid of the auto rev match, but otherwise it's always on, and so it would be nice to have an ability to turn that off. With me personally, I'm not an expert at heel towing. I'm actually quite horrible at it, so I actually appreciate the auto rev match. I think it feels really good. It's very quick and doesn't feel annoying in any way, and it'll probably do it better than anyone that can heel tow anyway. So honestly, it doesn't bother me one bit. Oh man, that time it's spinning those tires. Oh, this thing is fun. Tires in the front and 265 in the rears, and they're Michelin Pilot Super Sports, so they're not weak tires by any means. Very sticky tires, but this just goes to show that even though the numbers on this thing aren't huge, it still is a very exciting thing to drive. But we got some fantastic corners coming up, so let's see how the M2 handles them. So it feels great so far. I mean, very flat and composed. This does have a little bit of a stiffer setup, especially with a shorter wheelbase over the M4, so it feels a little firmer than an M4, but not by a huge margin, I don't think. It feels like it's on rails, really. It's really impressive, and the really impressive thing about these is you would think, being the smaller 2 Series, it would be a lot lighter than an M4, but it's not actually, because this has the same brakes, the same limited slip differential, same engine size as the M4. It actually is only 25 pounds lighter than an M4. So these weigh 3,450 pounds, and so even though it has a little of a higher weight, I mean, it's still a really low weight and lower than a lot of the competitors and whatnot, it doesn't feel that heavy. I would say this, honestly, so far, it feels, maybe 3,200 pounds, something like that, as far as how it actually feels when you're going around these corners. One nice thing I'm noticing here in the Sport Plus mode is, although stability control is still active, traction control is turned off, but the stability control is more relaxed. So it lets you, get a little bit squirmy, but not so much that you hurt yourself or anything. Steering weight is also a little bit on the lighter side. It's a little heavier here than it was in comfort mode, but not it's not a drastic change, I'd say, but it does feel pretty good still as well. I mean, it's not the most communicative steering still, but I think it does certainly feel better than the M235i that I reviewed, and that one was all-wheel drive as well. And that's one thing, I mean, this car feels completely different than an M235i to me. That car, it felt good, but it felt like it desperately needed sway bars, and even the one that I was reviewing had lowering springs, and it still felt like the suspension was a little sloppy. This, there's no sloppiness whatsoever to it. It really is a point-and-shoot type of deal. It gives you lots and lots of confidence. Like I said, you got these brakes straight off of the M4, and so they feel really great in this smaller car, even though, like I said, the weight difference isn't big, and so I think that's why they just swapped the same exact brakes as the M4, but it just really, the whole package feels really stout and really, really good. Another acceleration, because they're just too much fun. Got some good chirp that time. Man, though, I love when that turbo comes on, though. It really does feel like it's propelling you at warp speed. I mean, it's obviously, it throws you in the back of your seat, and it is pretty impressive, but it's not wild or anything like that, I would say. It feels a little more in control than the M4. The M4 felt like it constantly was trying to step out and like almost trying to kill you whenever you're going straight ahead full throttle, because it didn't have enough grip, it seemed. Whereas this, it certainly feels a little better matched, I think, although I will say, as far as handling and and stuff goes, I'll say that I think the M4 certainly feels like it has a lower center of gravity, because it most likely does, obviously with a carbon fiber roof, and it being a little bit lower and a little less bulbous, I guess, than the M2 here. So that's one thing, you know, I think this feels like it's got a little bit more heft higher up, but it's both feel fantastic. One thing I didn't even mention yet is the sound. This thing just sounds really nice. Now, there is a little bit of help from the speakers, but I mean, this one even has, I believe, the M Performance exhaust, which gives a little more growl than you probably get in the normal M2. And it sounds just really good. I mean, it's your typical 6-cylinder BMW sound, but it sounds, I think it actually sounds better than the M4 as well. The M4 felt a little more digitized. This feels a little more old school in its sound, I think. And I mean, both sound good. I wasn't one of those that hated the M4 sound to begin with, but for those that did, I think this feels a little more natural. Yeah, this is one of those cars that the limits are very high, and you can, you know, approach them, and it does feel playful, but it still feels like it's just such a capable car that even whenever you do try and push it around corners, it's just right there with you. It's a great dance partner. It never makes you nervous, really. It never makes you doubt what the car can do. You just point and shoot at reasonable speeds, of course, and it just goes, and it just follows every command precisely. All right, so I've been driving the M2 for a little while longer here, and it's still just such a blast. One thing I forgot to mention earlier in the review is the visibility in the M2, which is great. I mean, you can see everything around you so well here, thanks to a little bit of a taller profile over, you know, the M4 and whatnot. And so, I mean, all of the windows are very large, and even the rear window has a great view there in the back. And so overall, really good visibility. But as far as how this thing drives, going around more and more back roads, now we're unfortunately behind some traffic, so I can't go at quite the elevated speeds I was at before. But this thing is just so much fun. It's fun in a different way than some of its competitors. So, for example, you know, like the GT350 or the ZL1 Camaros, those are both, you know, about 10 to 15 grand more, so probably punching a little bit above this car's weight. But those, you know, they have more grip, but they also feel a lot heavier. This feels a lot lighter than all of those types of cars, and just feels a little more agile because of it. It feels a little less serious. You know, this is a little more, you just playful, you flip it into a corner, it's not a big deal. Whereas those cars, it's like, you know, it's heavier steering and everything feels so much more aggressive and crazy. This, it's a little bit of a lighter personality, I think, with the M2 is kind of how it's coming off to me. And it's even a lighter personality than even the M4, because the M4 is also razor sharp, much like this is, but the M4, it feels a little more composed, a little less playful, if that makes sense. And this, it just, you know, it still is very, very capable, very fun, and very impressive. You know, all the numbers are very impressive. It does everything very, very well, but it does it all a little less seriously, I think. And again, it's kind of hard to quantify or really put into words exactly how it feels, except it's just a little more whimsical, and it just gives you a feeling of fun that I don't know that other BMWs have the exact same feeling. They're all very impressive. You know, I've reviewed basically all the M cars at this point. They're all very impressive, but this has a little more character to it, a little more fun. It's a little less clinical to me, and I think it's just, again, just because of the smaller size, just a little bit of lighter handling, but still very, very flat, and, you know, there's no body roll really to speak of or anything. But I don't know, it's really growing on me quickly here. I haven't been driving it for, you know, a super long period of time, but it's just been a ton of fun. And so, yeah, I'm really impressed here with the M2. I think it's also very approachable. It's almost like a BRZ or something like that, where, you know, with this, it's way more power than a BRZ or something like that, but it feels approachable. It feels like it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to bite back. I mean, it certainly could, and I'm sure if I turned everything off, the thing would slide itself right off the road, you know, if you were driving recklessly. But whenever you're, you know, within reason and stuff, it's a really fun thing just to carve up a back road in, and it's a little more peaceful, a little less stressful than those cars that have higher limits and higher capabilities. This is one of those cars that I just want to keep driving on. I just want to take the red line one more time. I want to take it around one more corner and just keep on going and going and going. It's just one of those cars I love driving, and I don't want to stop. It's just so much fun and so addictive. Just, it's so rewarding. It's just so playful. Just a ton of fun. Other things to note, though, whenever we're just cruising at lower speeds here and stop and go traffic and things like that, it is still a very daily drivable vehicle. vehicle as well. You know, I mean, like I said, you do feel a little bit more of the road through the suspension, but I wouldn't call the suspension harsh or jarring in any way. It's certainly not like race car harsh or anything like that. Even in Sport Plus mode here, and you can put it into comfort, and then it gets a little bit, you know, more relaxed as well. But I mean, honestly, this is still totally daily drivable. It's just a little more communicative, I think, and I actually really like that about it. So I have no problem with the ride whatsoever. I think that overall it's just a really compelling package, and that's the last thing I want to mention is the price of these things. Like I said, whenever I was talking about the interior, there really aren't too many options, which is rare for BMWs. And so even if you try and load one of these up, you're still under 55 grand really, and most of them, you know, the way this one's configured and stuff, are right around 53,000. So it's really, I think this is very competitively priced, and especially against like even the M4. Like I said, okay, so maybe it's not quite as sharp and quite as intense as the M4, but it's, I would say this is 90% of, at least the feeling is probably 90 or 85% of the performance you get in the M4, and I think it's, like I said, even just as fun or maybe even slightly more fun than an M4. And these are like 14 to 16 grand less than an M4, and those have, you know, mile-long options lists, so you can, you know, deck them out and get them, you know, well into the 70s and even the 80s, I believe. And so whereas this, it's basically right in the low 50s, that's where it stays, and you can get one of these, you know, for that price all day long, which is great. And like I said, it's just, I don't know if you'd spend the extra money on an M4. I don't know really why you would. This is plenty of fun on its own. It's plenty of speed, you know, to have on the streets. It's just one of those cars. I think this is all the performance you really need to enjoy on the streets and have fun. And so I think really it's the one to pick out of the BMW lineup. I think it's the one that put the biggest grin on my face so far. And it's just the one that, obviously now you can tune them, and like the tuned M3 that I reviewed, that's a lot more exciting in a straight line. If straight line speed is your thing, you can go up the BMW range and get one of the higher horsepower ones that they have. But this is still plenty quick. You know, one thing I mentioned earlier with waiting for that turbo to spool up, that's really only the case in those lower RPMs. The higher the RPMs get, the quicker that turbo is to respond, and you really are never sitting around waiting for it. You know, I mean, you do have to drive it like a turbo car. You know, it's not as immediate as a naturally aspirated car, but it just, everything feels great. And, you know, like in Sport Plus mode here, throttle response is razor sharp as well, so that's always right there. The second that you just tap the gas, it immediately wants to just lurch forward. And like I said, these brakes are still pretty touchy, but you know, there's like nothing for the first like inch of travel there, inch or two, and then you really get like all the travel, right, or you get all the brake bite right there, you know, I'd say about 1/3 of the way down on the brake pedal. So again, it just takes a little bit more delicate inputs with the throttle and the brakes here in the M2, but I like that because it kind of rewards your finesse, and it rewards, you know, having the right inputs. But yeah, this thing is just a blast. I absolutely love it. So huge thanks once again to Greg for allowing me to review his awesome M2 here. I can kind of see the hype now. I mean, people got really excited about this car, and I can see why. I've never driven a 1 Series M before. I know that a lot of people will say that's like the golden standard here as far as modern BMWs, but this is really a ton of fun, and I can see why it's a lot of people and my own favorite out of the BMW M range. So anyway, once again, huge thanks to Greg, huge thanks to you guys for watching. Let me know your thoughts about the M2 in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.